Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Max Rounds 30 podcast. We're back after over a year and a half of saying that we were going to be back, but not actually going to be back because Jeff and I are liars. It's been a lot that has happened in the time since then and now, but we have a new host with us. And before I get into that, of course, it is Jeff from Dust2US, and we've got Dat Paladin over there, who is an analyst and caster, if you are unfamiliar, and myself, Jacob Halfman, who is, I suppose, now working at ESL Faceit Group. So it's been wild, and we're going to cover all of this last week's and probably a little bit more North American Counter-Strike content. And we're going to do it in under 30 minutes. Usually we say with no overtime, but yeah, probably be no overtime this time. We're still messing with that mechanic. We're still trying things out, so we'll see. But how are you guys doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I'm glad to join this project. I've seen that we've got a lot of it's been like a carousel of different guests, and I hope that I can be a little bit more of a stable one. But hopefully, season 4 kicks off with a bang, and we have a good one today.
Well, all right. Well, shall we hit the timer and get started?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, and here we go. 30 minutes on the clock. Going into our first topic of the day, we've got the Blast Spring groups, and there has been quite a bit that's been going on with that. Of course, we've had our first bits of the group stage going on, and shall we dig in?
Yeah, I mean, EG is probably the biggest conversation piece, I'd like to think, just with them upsetting the number 1 team in the world in Heroic in a best of 3 and absolutely getting smashed by Vitality today at the time of this recording. So I guess there's different ways we can go about it. We can either talk about EG's results outright or kind of the discourse surrounding it. Like, where do we want to kind of talk about?
I mean, I think it's natural to sort of start the conversation off with what they did on the server because, you can't really understate the fact that they did beat the number 1 team in the world. I mean, you can kind of argue, is Heroic the number 1 team in the world right now? Probably not. In my opinion, they don't really have the trophy cabinet to back up that statement, but it still is a major win for a squad that only beat 2 European teams in the entirety of 2022. And it was definitely a good, first showing for Wiz. He looked like he struggled a little bit later against Vitality, but he had a very good opening game against Heroic, considering he has no Tier 1 Atlanta experience at all in his entire career up to this point.
Yeah, I really enjoyed what I saw from him. I mean, just having just that impact outright was something that I wasn't expecting. I was expecting him to fall very fast, but obviously, I think in the Vitality game, I don't think anybody really showed up. It was just an outclassing, largely just from Zywoo laying down the law. But I think the youngsters showed up. Hext and Wiz put on great performances, but I think seeing Breeze actually, fight
Yeah.
back and actually show that he's still a player with a lot of skill is something that bodes very well for EG's future. I mean, I like everything on EG right now. I have no real qualms with any players if Breezy can keep up his form. I mean, obviously, Automatic is going to continue doing automatic things. And Nealon has been showing that he has impact in terms of frags, and he's been calling pretty decently too. So, like, if this team can at least, qualify for Legends, I'd say that's an automatic success. I mean, that I know it's a little bit of ways away right now, but I feel like they should be a shoe-in to qualify for the RMR and make the major. But from then on out, what's the kind of ceiling for this team? I think is the big question.
Yeah, definitely. I think you brought up the point with Breezy there, where it's like, if there was like a storm of voices calling for Cirque to be booted, I think there was a slightly like smaller contingent of NA analysts calling for Breezy to just be finally kicked out of the squad because while Cirque was kind of a disaster for the team in terms of his performance, there was a lot you really expect from Breezy. I mean, I think I checked, he's only 23 years old, and he feels like he's a player like over the hill. So it's good to see
Yeah.
him sort of get back to something resembling his prior form. And I do know they mentioned on either in an interview or on the desk that they had like retooled the roles once Wiz came into the team. Now that they finally have a permanent roster settled, so hopefully he can continue to show something resembling his 2019 form. Now that they're back, sort of in the mix.
It's just nice to see, I think, EG have some success with that roster, especially considering you finally have an Opper who's stable, right? I mean, we all loved Cirque when he was in his prime. We still love him, but it's just like it's tough to support that kind of performance over that period of time. And I think bringing in Wiz, who came into tier 2, has kind of been a solid opper for a long time, and then finally spent time and moved to EG and played on the lower roster for a little while. And we started to see some of that consistency come in, and now he's starting to get these tier 1 reps, and he's looking like he's going to be a pretty good opper for them. Now, I guess I personally missed the Vitality game because I've been doing stuff today, but so you'll have to fill me in on that. But from what I saw yesterday, he looked like the real deal. And I think the one thing, of course, that is concerning, and I think we'll roll around to this in a bit, is the kind of the way that the team management has been kind of handling the image of this squad as a whole. It's been interesting to say the least, because I feel like, Jeff, I know you've got a lot to say. Heldon, I know you've got a lot to say too, but it's just like, guys, come on. It make it so hard to support this team as a North American fan, as an EG fan, when they win one best of 3, first one of the year, against Heroic. Yes, top 1 team. Yes, it is the first best of 3 they've played this year after the player break. So you can't just come out and start saying, you guys, like, come on, why you're doubting us? Why are the casters so biased against us? All this other junk. Like, you can't just come out here and just start throwing words when, one best of 3 isn't making it to Legends in the Major. One best of 3 is not an accomplishment. It's progress.
Yeah.
It's what teams do as their job. Your job is to win best of 3.
Exactly.
Like we say, like, if like the Cubs win like a regular season game, you're not like, holy shit, like that's like the Cubs are back. Like, it's
Well, that's a perfect analogy too, because like it's like there's so many games. There are so many games. It's just like the MLB or the NBA. Like, you got to win more than one. There's a lot to win. Come on now.
Like, they're not running on the field and popping the champagne bottles and dunking the Gator, turning over the Gatorade, like, because they beat like a regular season, they won like a regular season match. Like, to get into it a little bit more, what he's specifically referring to is this whole little back and forth between Yanko, who's on the desk for Blast, and this
Yanko isn't,
senior
but
Yanko is
yeah,
right, because it was about Pimp. Thank you.
right,
And
right.
this person who works for Evil Genius is called GamerDoc, who is their senior, I believe, their senior performance director. Senior, it's very hard with EG because they have a lot of support
A lot of
staff.
job
Senior
titles.
director, senior director of performance, or something to that effect. And she went in on the desk for saying for being like, well, Heroic obviously played bad and that's why EG won. And the big issue people are taking up with her is that she's going in on some of our best analysts in the space and saying, oh, their analysis is wrong because they're underestimating Evil Geniuses. There's not, like, it's ridiculous from that perspective, because they haven't done anything to deserve kudos from the desk. They're just another team that shows up. It's like when you would have like Fluxo show up to the desk of a Blast, or show up to a Blast Spring group, or you'd have like NKT, or some of these teams that are outside of the top 20, top 30. Like, the desk doesn't have to give you any respect until you have shown that you're a team capable of performing at an acceptable tier 1 level for how much you're investing into the squad.
Yeah, I mean, they are the lowest seed at this tournament. I mean, and that's to be expected. I mean, if I was on the desk there as well, I'd be giving the same kind of comments about Evil Geniuses, because I don't think they deserve that kind of plaudits by any means. I mean, the amount of money and resources and staff that are being poured into this organization, and they have just this much to show for it after all is said and done. After you see the heights of when they first bought out the original NRG roster and seeing the successes there, to have this be your accomplishments as of right now, like, I think you really have to put it into perspective as to how far this organization has fallen in terms of respectability and just pride and accomplishment as an NA fan. I mean, I know we were talking about this before, but like, there aren't many EG fans at this point. Like, people aren't really, pulling for this organization. When you look at the other organizations in the space, you look at Complexity, and like, obviously they have their own issues to speak of, but they still have a very passionate CEO behind them who's constantly supporting them, trying to make moves to make sure that this team is actually successful with the Halzer import. And then obviously you have Liquid, who is just continuing to be the premier organization in North America, getting big time signings in terms of Yekindar. But Evil Geniuses have nothing to speak of in that sense. And obviously, this Blue Point project is supposed to be their kind of, you know, godsend to North America. But obviously, I don't necessarily think that it's being successful as of yet. We still haven't seen enough of a product from this organization to suggest that it is a success. One best of three will simply not kind of redact all of the past transgressions of this organization.
Yeah.
Period.
And I'm going to wrap this topic up in a bow and say, listen, EG, I'm hopeful. I'm a fan. I think you guys will do well. I do think you need some academy competition in North America, but I hope that you guys do well. Now let's move on. We got one more thing I
Well,
want to
no,
touch
no,
on.
hold on,
Oh,
hold
okay,
on.
all
No,
right.
no,
What do
no,
you
no,
got?
no.
What do you got?
Okay, because here's like the thing to build on what Ani said is the fact you have Liquid, who are their rhetorical position in the NA scene is like, we're the best, we're the team, we're like the tier one team that you follow. Complexity has done a good job building themselves as like the plucky underdogs with sort of the eccentric, like offbeat, like characters like Floppy,
Yeah.
with Floppy and all that, and they've sort of
Wide
that's
swung.
sort of their brand. But then Evil Geniuses sort of exists in this middle space where they try really hard to be professional, and so the players don't really have a lot of character to them. They
Mhm.
don't let their players do a lot. They don't let their players have a very offbeat kind of more edgy social media presence. But they don't have the results to be like we're just the stoic winners of the NA scene. So it's like weird that when for an org that is so like tightly wound about their players being prim and proper and in line and not engaging with the trolls or not having you know I'm doing the Hewlett Packard like moment of the game, and my name is Hex, and da 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 da, and like I'm sorry for bantering during the match. I hope no one was offended. I just want my team to have a good game because that's what heroes do, or like whatever. But then you just have these sort of ancillary characters at the EG organization who are like, let's get it, let's go, and to last point of that, she says to Pimp, she's like, oh yeah, like I'm giving you guys tips to improve and you're just bitching at me. Like this is the perfect example of what's wrong with the space. Like that phrasing of like this is what's wrong with the space is like such a defeatist and such like a almost it's something you see a lot of the times when someone's like in a spot of being like persecuted or has like a persecution complex where they're like the fact that people won't invite CLG Red to IM Katowice, this is everything that's wrong with the space. Like it's just a very pathetic like persecution complex from them, and I don't want that to be their image because that doesn't build positive engagement and that doesn't make people want to be a fan of your team.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's good. Good job. I appreciate the interruption because I think that's a good point to talk on because you're right. I mean, it's just like if you're going to be controlling the image so tightly, what's the point if the if the people who are doing the controlling are uncontrolled as hell? They're just going around and just kind of making it hard to be a fan. And I think that's very much so one of the big points that at least I want to come out of this with is that it's very hard to be an EG fan. It's awesome to be able to cheer for them when they have success, but please make it easier for us to be fans. Please. So, anything more we want on this topic before we scoot on?
Oh, I
Do
think
we
we're
want to
good.
talk about
Yeah.
liquid air complexity at all?
Yes, that's actually what I did want to move on. Yeah, I don't know. There's not too much to say there except for it's disappointing. I mean, Liquid looked like they were starting to kind of show up and then kind of just turned on too late. And I didn't unfortunately catch the complexity game, but I did look at some scores and go, ouch. So
Mm.
As far as Liquid is concerned, I think you could definitely see they're having some map pool woes now that Dust 2 is out. And they decided to play into Nuke. And my goodness, I mean, this entire series was riddled with mistakes, like across the board. And Liquid had kind of the map 2 in the palm of their hand, couldn't actually convert. It goes into double overtime. You have Naf putting the team on his shoulders, essentially, and they just can't get over the line. Yekindar was absolutely absent, and OG ran away with it. And I don't necessarily feel as though OG kind of outclassed them in that game. Liquid just looked very sluggish, and I think you could probably say the same about Complexity. They just looked like they weren't ready, and that I mean, as the underdogs, I mean, North America as a region and as a whole, like we need to be kind of prepared heading into these first kind of tournaments, setting the tone for what is coming up in the year ahead. And having these slow starts is what just absolutely destroys your momentum. that's where we have these topsy-turvy brackets where, Complexity Liquid fighting for third, fourth. And I don't necessarily think that we're going to have a very pretty gauntlet heading forward as well. And it all starts with those first best of threes. And it looks like both of these teams were just not prepared, which is very disappointing to say the least.
It's interesting that, you mentioned that sort of sluggish start for both teams, because I know Complexity, I believe, did boot camp in Copenhagen before this event, like a short boot camp just to get ready. I don't have a ton to say about Liquid, but Complexity, I'm starting to become worried for them. They
Yeah.
miss out on the major. You bring in Holzerk, everyone's like, okay, this is what you need to get Fang online. This is what you need to get Graham online. Uh, you know, Finally the biggest, the flat tire in the team is gone, but they're still not really at a space where they can compete with the best in Europe. And it's like, I don't know, like this is going to be a very pivotal next 3 months for them, I think, where they don't, if they don't make the major, or they make the major in a very sort of like gasping, sort of like pathetic crawling over the finish line, like we saw with Imperial, at Rio. That's when I think you start to need either considering, an IGL change, or one of the three sort of star, rifling players has to go, because unfortunately, like they're not really improving anymore in an appreciable way, is what I'm kind of seeing. So, that's something we really have to keep an eye on, is
If
when does this complexity project justify
it
changes?
feels like they, when they do all pop off, they're an amazing team. But the issue is that I feel like they have no room to breathe, at least role wise. I'm not super sure exactly, what roles they are all playing right now, but like it just, it's like we haven't seen Fang really hit any sort of appreciable, like incredible form in the last in a while. Honestly, I mean, it's been a while since we've really seen him be himself. And just the team as a whole just kind of feels like it's a bounce back between either Grim having an amazing game and them coming so close to victory, or they all sort of play well and they're able to push across something. They're just inconsistent, and it's and I'm in the same boat about worrying about where is Complexity going to go from here. So whether it means they need to swap out one of the riflers and maybe make a change so that the roles work better together or something. It's just it's starting to feel like they're running out of time.
I think you still have very, very potential in this core of
100%.
complexity. I mean, Grim, Floppy, and Fang should be delivering time in and time out. I think it's time just for a coaching slash IGL staff change. Overall, I mean, obviously, I think TC and JT have good synergy with one another, and I don't think that you're gonna get one or the other to go. I think it's gonna be like both, which allows for complexity's identity to kind of change and try to find a little bit more in, I don't know, a little bit more structure maybe, or maybe even going more loose and making that these roles for Grim, Floppy, and Fang to be a lot more, just feel out the map and try to default a little bit more rather than, I don't know, these set executes just aren't working for this team. Like I don't think it is. And overall, I think just complexity needs a change of pace. I thought it would have kind of come to fruition with the Halzerk move, but I guess they need. I think they just need a systemic change overall.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we're running out of time because we're not used to this 30-minute format for a year and a half. So we're going to scoot on. We've got two more big topics that we want to cover, and we're going to have to go a little bit quicker as we run into these. So moving on to next one, we've got ESL Conference, Pro League Conference North America, and
Qualifier.
no, it's not a qualifier. That is actually not true. It is a part of the full main Pro League event. Now that is the adjustment. Now,
yeah, okay, EFG boy.
listen, I've talked. They're trying to hammer that home that it's a part of Pro League now, which whatever, it's online, whatever, however you want to view it, it's technically part of the main event. But I was lucky enough to be able to run production for all of the North America Pro League Conference, so I got to firsthand watch all of these matches. And my
lucky, you say?
Lucky is
lucky
a term. Yeah. Okay. So first takeaway, ATK looking pretty damn good. Second takeaway, MIBR concerning. Third takeaway, Nouns. Come on,
man.
All right.
I mean,
okay. So
that best
suffering.
of three.
let's start from the beginning. We're gonna go fast. We're trying to do this in maybe a couple minutes here. So first matchup, it was MIBR versus Nouns. This was the opening. It was a double elimination bracket with 3 teams. So it if you weren't paying attention, yeah, it was a little weird. So MIBR versus Nouns, first best of 3. I believe it was like Inferno, Vertigo, Overpass. It only took 2 maps. It was a 2-0 for MIBR. Nouns looked like they kind of had something going in both maps, but ultimately just kind of totally totally lost track and just couldn't adjust. MIBR just kind of MIBR just kind of looks like one of those teams where you let them continue to play, like you just let them creep back into the game and they will just crawl their way back round by round. It's very outsiders-esque in my opinion. Just the way they're able to extend a game and get back into it. But yeah, I mean, that first showing from Nouns was pretty not great. So, any thoughts on that first best of 3?
Yeah, I think there was a discussion that I mean that's obviously Insani's debut.
Yep.
He didn't necessarily look too flashy. I mean, keep in mind you have now lost Joda and Cello, 2 fantastic riflers for this MIBR core, and you're now bringing up a young and up and comer from their academy squad, and he looked very disappointing, and that's just very scary for MIBR. And we'll talk about it as we keep going. But this MIBR squad to me looks like the Walking Wounded. It looks like a skeleton of a roster rather than a true roster.
Yeah.
And I have very low expectations. Honestly, it felt like Nouns lost themselves throughout this event, and not necessarily MIBR qualifying for conference.
Yeah, we're gonna take this in a different way. I'm gonna say, okay, we're not gonna go best of 3 by best of 3, but MIBR moved on from that one. Nouns went to lower bracket. MIBR then played against ATK. ATK took that one and then
manhandled them.
Yep,
Yeah.
and then it went down to lower bracket where Nouns blew it again. So let's just talk about this as a whole. Nouns readjusted for that second best of 3. They looked so good, and then they dominated on Inferno. They made MIBR look like chumps, and then they go into Vertigo, and they have a very worrying I believe it was a CT side start. I don't remember. They had a worrying first half. And then they crawled it all the way back. They got up to 15. I think it was like 15-11. They let MIBR back into the game and lost it in double OT. And
it's like
and then Overpass was just like a stomp. So
yeah. And I'm sorry, like ATK fans out there or ATK players or whatever, ATK enjoyers. It's like I don't feel like we have a lot to say about ATK because they just kind of came into the event. They did what they had to do.
Yep.
They manhandled MIBR and they qualified, even with the
Mhm.
stand-in. It's like whatever. Like it's much more fun to talk about what went wrong than what went right. And ATK just played
ATK
better.
did their job.
ATK did what they went there to do. I will say, like Nouns was just so painful to watch as a
Ugh.
fan of that team because you see the first map, which correct me if I'm first map was Inferno,
Yep,
yeah.
and they
And
absolutely
you're like,
stomped them.
oh yeah, like let Bobby cook, and then it gets to Vertigo, and they're a little shaky, but like they come back. B Wills is firing off. Stamina has some good rounds with the op, and you're like, all right, like great, like because the thing is, you look at MIBR and like Henny's playing really bad, and Sani's not playing great, and so you're like, okay, they got this. Like they get it up to 15. You're like, all right, overtime, great. And then they just blow it, and then it goes to third map, and like everyone at that point knew it was over.
Yeah.
Like that team doesn't have the mental to play a third map of a best of 3 series.
Yeah, and I just feel like their CT sides have always been such an issue. Like since the RMRs, like they've been having incredible T side hauls and like the game in the palm of their hands, and just fundamentally, philosophically, I don't know what it is. And I thought Stamina would have given enough time to kind of figure this out, but it's still such a problem. I mean, on Vertigo, 7 CT rounds, and they fumbled it in overtime as well. And on Overpass, they had 8 T rounds after their first half. Like that should be case closed on a map like Overpass, especially even with the kind of CT changes and whatnot. It still should be enough to kind of close things out. 3 meager rounds to close out the last half of the series, and I'm sure a lot of it has to come down to the mental. We've talked about how dysfunctional this roster can be in that sense. But I don't know. I think fundamentally there's still the same issues that plagued Nouns before, still here, no matter what the changes have been.
I think the biggest statement for Overpass from Nouns was that one round right towards the end of the game where, for whatever reason, they put 3 on B site they put Cynic all by himself on A site. They in the with like 20 seconds left, they have Cynic rotate down to B to do a full stack on B, and then MIBR just smokes off, plants a bomb, wins the round, and then like even the casters like JRT and Boggs were like, all right, game's over. MIBR have won, going to conference because like what is going on with that
I
team where
have
you call in no information, no contact, no bomb spotted? All right, everyone, stack B. Like it's
so
insanity.
to provide some clarity on this, MIBR figured out nouns, and this happened on Vertigo. So what kept happening over and over was that at about like 30, 32 seconds, something like that, they would just abandon a bomb site. On Vertigo, they kept leaving the A bomb site. They'd leave the B bomb site. They would just, without spotting bomb, the anchor would just leave. And then immediately after that, MIBR would hit the bomb site. They'd roll in, no resistance, and they'd just have a free plant, and it'd be like a 5v5 post plant, 5v4, 4, whatever. It'd be a high number of players alive post plant situation. And it just kept happening over and over again. It happened about halfway through Vertigo. I mean, that happened right at that moment when, maybe not right at, but kind of around that moment on Vertigo where it was like 15, 11, or 14, whatever, where Nouns was up. They were about to put it away. And then MIBR just started to realize that Nouns has a problem on their CT side. They just start pulling players for no, and what you were talking about, Cynic just left that bomb site early at like 32 seconds on the clock, just left the A bomb site. Then they just immediately rolled in right after. They literally threw the smokes immediately after that happened. So yeah, it's
I just
fun.
don't know what's going on there. Like, you obviously have Stamina as the IGL, then you have Semphis as the coach, and you have Cynic as like the secondary caller for the team. And there's like a lot of smart people, there. So I'm just kind of like, and I know this will hurt now. Like this will leave like mental wounds in Noun's head
Yeah.
for like a while because that's kind of a team that doesn't take losses very well. I don't think.
Hmm.
And I don't think they're really in a position to make roster moves either. But it's one of those things where it's like just super disappointing. Like this was
Yeah.
sort of their chance. This is the worst looking MIBR we've seen in a while. They've lost their IGL. They've lost a lot of their identity, and it's like if you can't get over the line, then now you're not going to pro league, and well, that sucks a lot for
Yeah.
that team. So we want to, with what's precious time we have left, we know the news dropped today about the RMR qualification format. We're going to cover that next week because my natural intuition from the PGL majors is that if enough players like MSL bitch about there only being one open qualifier, PG or Blast will fold like a fucking deck chair on that. So I'm like, why
That's true.
why
That's
bother
true.
discoursing it? Uh, so what we're gonna do to end the episode off with is I want to have a quick discussion with you guys. We'll each get a minute, and I want to ask you, what's your favorite ECL roster move that happened in the off season, and what do you think that, and just sort of tell me about that and how it affects that team moving forward. So, Paladin, would you like to start?
Ooh, man. I mean, there are a lot of ECL roster moves that have happened, and I don't necessarily know if I love all of them all too much. I guess by process of elimination, Peacemaker to Team One or Los plus one, I guess, is one that I don't really see anything too bad about it.
Mind you, it hasn't happened yet, but
Right, right. But if it does happen, I just have a good feeling about it in terms of what experience it brings. I mean, in terms of all the players on this roster, there isn't any true veteran leadership on this team. Obviously, Maluk's been playing on this organization for so long, but you don't have a player or a coach that has been to the tippity top of the space yet, and that's kind of what Team One is looking to do. They want to, make the major. You try to go deep there, or just being taken seriously in the Brazilian space as a whole. And I think Peacemaker could do that. He's experienced that kind of limelight before, and maybe that could be a difference maker. Because I like the core of this team. I like what they showed previously, and Mobs has still been putting on a good performance. So I guess that would be my roster move to pick. If it
I
happens, obviously.
think for me, the move I'm most excited for is the addition of Eris to Strife. It's sort of his return to a team that he helped sort of build and flesh out. It's entirely different from when he was, winning Philadelphia 16 with it. But I think an issue a Strife had was you had, he replaces Jitter, and it's nice to bring in someone with a more someone more mellow, someone more, a role player, someone who's less temperamental. Because for what it's worth, that was a very young team, that was a very temperamental team. The combination of Infinite, Jitter, and Wreck. I don't have any super serious insight to that team, but I could imagine that it's a very bringing another sort of mature voice. That team can has a lot of upsides. So that's sort of what I'm most excited for.
All right. Okay. Well, then with my last minute, I guess. You know what? I'm gonna have to go ahead and say Slight to Detonate. Kind of is probably gonna be the move that I think is gonna be pretty interesting. They previously had Florence in as their AWP, and having observed the entire season of ECL last season, Florence was not the right answer for that team, and he was kind of a liability for that roster. They had lots of problems, just mainly due to having an op that really just couldn't lock things down. And I think Slight is the kind of opper who has the skill to do that, and he is probably one of the potential up and comers in North America. I have heard rumors that his attitude might be something that might have been a problem. But if he can, rectify that, or if his attitude is fine in this team, or whatever the deal was, whatever, if his chemistry, whatever previously, I think this can be big for them. I think having a solid opper, it can transform a team. It transformed Evil Geniuses. I think it can transform Detonate. I mean, they've got Brett, Cryptic, Micro, Freshie, and now Slight. That's a scary roster. So, well, with that does knock all 30 minutes off of our timer for this week's episode of the Max Runs 30 podcast. It feels so good to be back. And you can find us on Spotify and Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. You can find us pretty much everywhere. We got to go back through and make sure everything is branded properly now. It's RIP RBM. But, it's been great. It's been great having another episode, and thank you for spending your 30 minutes with us. Check us out on Twitter at max_rounds_30, and we'll probably expand that to some other platforms in the future if Twitter goes kabloom, but we'll see. But hey, first episode with Mr. Paladin over here, and thank you from all of us, and we'll see you next time.
We promise to make another one eventually.
We will be making another one. All right, see ya next week, probably.